show ready? Okay.
You are listening to America's home for stadium news and information.
Stadiums USA Radio on Yahoo Sports Radio and yahoosportsradio.com.
Once again, with your ticket to the action,
here's Bill Hazen.
We've talked about many communities and their stadium stories, but the city of Cleveland and the surrounding area has a great stadium story to tell. To help us with that, we're going to reach out to Dan Coughlin, who has seen a lot of it himself. He was a longtime sports anchor and reporter for WJW Television in Cleveland, a very famous set of call letters in our industry. And before that, a writer for the Cleveland Plain Dealer. He's seen a lot of this firsthand. He is the author of 3 books. Dan, it's great to visit with you. And why don't we just start? If we can select a stadium, we'll go ahead and throw a dart at the wall, a favorite stadium that you particularly enjoyed visiting during your time as a reporter. Does one really stand out? A great place to go to work?
I'm going to throw one out in your backyard. I always liked Comiskey Park, old Comiskey Park, the original. Mm-hmm. And, for the first 18 years of my working life, I was a reporter for the Cleveland Plain Dealer. And for, some years at the end of my tenure at the Plain Dealer, I was the traveling baseball writer. But I liked Comiskey Park going back far beyond my working days when I was in college. A bunch of us, we rented a school bus, to go from the South Bend on a Sunday afternoon to a doubleheader with the Cleveland Indians and the White Sox. We sat in the upper deck, left field, and we hooted on Minnie Minoso during both games. It was a great, great time. And even going back as a traveling baseball writer, we all loved the old ballparks. Fenway, I really enjoyed going to Fenway. Tiger Stadium. I also like Tiger Stadium in Detroit. The old ones, not now. Now these new ones, now they're doing cookie cutter again baseball parks. Not the round ones. Those were definitely cookie cutters. But now they're all trying to have their own little unique touches to their baseball fields, with an odd dimension in the outfield or something. So they're all trying to do that. That's fine. I prefer my ballparks from back in the early part of the 1900s.
Boy, and Cleveland really had such a ballpark also in League Park. I've been by the site. It had been largely cleared except for that one building on the northwest corner, which was the original entry point. I'll tell you, I was there after it was cleared, Dan, and it still evokes your imagination of what actually happened.
If you're at that the old little ticket office at one time, that little building, why, that was the corner, and that's where Ruth and Gehrig, those guys made hay. They would lift fly balls onto Lexington Avenue, and sometimes they would land on the lawns of the double houses across the street. I missed by 1 year seeing the Indians play a game in League Park. They moved out of that park in middle season of 1947. Bill Veeck had just bought the team. And so I didn't see my first Indians game until 1948 at the old stadium. My kids and I, we loved the old stadium, that old 75, 80,000 seat stadium that was only filled for a World Series game, which wasn't often, and for Browns games regularly. I would take my kids to baseball games. There'd be 5,000 people there, and they were the same 5,000 every night, and we knew them all. And I could take my 3 little boys, and they would run all around. I had only one rule. If you go to the bathroom, don't touch anything. And I didn't have to worry about them because we knew every single person in the ballpark. And they would wander around, run around. One of my kids, who's now in his early 30s, said to me one time, he said, "Dad, I miss the old stadium." He said, "We owned it," and we did.
Oh, isn't that good? Of course, you're referring to Cleveland's Municipal Stadium.
The big old 75, 80,000 Cleveland Municipal Stadium, built in 1930. They were hoping to get the 1932 Olympics, or 32 Olympics, but it didn't get it, of course. It was one of those homogeneous parks for both football and baseball, but it was round and later on when the Browns were on national television, all the games were on television, regional or national, and they would have the blimp shots from the sky, and they would look down on Cleveland Municipal Stadium with its old roof. It was distinctive. It was unique. Mm-hmm. You knew from the air immediately, oh, this game's in Cleveland. There's the old Cleveland Municipal Stadium.
The scope of the place, what a contrast to League Park, which is a very intimate ballpark, and then you had this stadium.
You're right. League Park tucked in a neighborhood.
Yeah, and then you had this stadium, which was very prominent on the lakefront. I always credited the people who built that park for that vision. What sense of that scope did you get when you sat in there?
Well, see, growing up in it, it seemed like this is what a ballpark should be for baseball or football. It wasn't until later I realized, my God, how distinctive this is. And then when they tore it down and they built this cookie-cutter football stadium, they could have done some things by every seat, it seemed, in the new stadium, these new football stadiums, is exposed to the elements. You could always find cover underneath they had a roof, and every winter during the winter storms, Art Modell would have, when he was running the stadium here, had to put a new roof on the place every year because the terrible storms coming in off Lake Erie, they would blow big hunks of the roof off every winter. And so there was an expensive place to maintain. But Modell used to say that, when people would hold up signs, John 3:13 or whatever those signs said about the biblical quotes, Art Modell said that he thought that John 3:13 meant that was the only men's room with running water. And yeah, it was old. The plumbing was bad. The electrical was bad. It was a nightmare to constantly maintain every year. But for the fans, we loved it. You'd walk through the concourses and you'd smell the hot dogs and the stadium mustard, which was unique to our place. Stadium mustard, not this phony ballpark mustard they have at the Indians' place now. Bottom line, we love the old stadium. In fact, until 1964 or 65, we did not have an enclosed press box. The press box was a few rows of the upper deck carved out and with some benches put in there. It was all outdoors for the baseball writers and announcers. One time we had an announcer named Jimmy Dudley.
Oh, sure.
And in the outdoor press box, the high pop foul was hit behind the plate. And Jimmy Dudley just glanced up at it, a foul ball. Then he looked down at his notes, and the ball hit him right on top of his head and knocked him out.
Every once in a while, a promotion comes up at a stadium that does not work. Here in Chicago, we had one called Disco Demolition.
I remember
You remember that? Well, Cleveland's equivalent.
You wound up forfeiting a game.
Oh, I'll say, and I really think that was that broke Bill Veck's heart. I really think that event really broke his heart. I don't think he was ever the same. The equivalent of that in Cleveland is the famed 10-cent beer night. Yes. And there's this iconic picture. I'm looking at it right now of Jeff Burroughs, who looks like he's scared out of his skin trying to get out of the ballpark with two of his players. Take us through that. You know that story real well.
I know it. Sure. It was first week in June 1974. Now, people think that was the only beer night any team ever tried to do. It wasn't. Every team was doing those beer nights by then. Indians started it 2 years before that with a charming Sunday afternoon of the July 4th weekend, the Sunday afternoon game, and the first one was Nickel Beer Day, and they had strolling musicians, and it was nothing but charming. By 2 years later, they raised the price to a dime, and it was a Tuesday night, I believe. Anyway, that was the first of two beer nights that were on our schedule. Now, this whole thing started a week before that in Texas, where they had their beer night, and the Indians were their opponent in their beer night. And so that game, a brawl broke out. It had nothing to do with the beer, but between the Indians and the Rangers. Texas fans threw their Pearl beer and dumped their beer on Lone Star beer all over our players. And so there was a lot of bad blood there. Now, the Rangers then were coming up here to be our opponent on our beer night. And so we had a radio guy here. You'll remember him. Maybe your listeners won't, but Pete Franklin was on the 50,000-watt station here in Cleveland.
Oh, yeah.
And for a week, he promoted Revenge Against the Rangers when they come up here to open a 3-game series on our beer night. People came in a vengeful mood. Many of them arrived at the stadium half drunk. And so all sorts of strange things started happening from the very beginning. First inning, that was back in the days of streaking. Some guy streaked across the outfield, went from left to right or right to left. That started it. That just started it. Every inning there was something. Then they started throwing cherry bombs and firecrackers into the bullpens, and then more and more, there were streakers between every inning. And then another time, a father and son combination. Streakers, all their clothes, they're naked. They run to first base, then they both steal second base and slide into second base. A father and son combination, both of them stark naked. And we're thinking, boy, back home, old mom must be very proud of them. Anyway, by the 8th inning, things were really out of hand. Now, not just one streaker, but 50 streakers at one time, and then just fans where they would race across the outfield. And then by the 9th inning, top of the 9th, Indians are losing like 5-2, and they score a couple of runs, and now they've got both the tying and winning runs in scoring position. And by now they have to stop the game because there were hundreds of people now loitering in the outfield. They couldn't play anymore. And so the umpires finally called a forfeit, and they couldn't have resumed the game anyway because somebody had stolen all 3 bases. I mean, a fan. Somebody walked out of that stadium with the bases.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
What a night in Cleveland, I'll tell you. That's part of the stadium story. I'll guarantee you that. Dan, it is great to visit. Come on back. We have to spin some more stories because you're a terrific guy. You've had a wonderful writing career. Keep it up. My goodness, you have a lot of stories to tell, and we wish you all the best.
Bill, thanks. Appreciate being on your show.
Oh, pleasure. Dan Coughlin, our guest, longtime sports anchor for WJW Television in Cleveland, sports writer for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and author.